severe weather again for tomorrow night. That does include the potential for damaging winds and tornadoes. Thinking remains that in general, most storms will probably be strongest to our south. In saying that, though, still some very real possibility here that we could have some stronger storms even up here in the northern part of the state. Give me a moment here while I go ahead and share this on the WTVA news and weather pages here for just a quick moment. So give me a second for that to all the way load in here. Hopefully, all are doing all right tonight. Again, I think moisture remains a limiting factor on the overall severity of what we end up seeing, and hopefully, an overall limiting factor that keeps things from being as bad as they could end up becoming. With that in mind, let's go ahead and kind of look here at one of the things that's kind of important is that there's going to be a high wind potential with this all the way kind of through this event. As you can see, large portion of the United States included under that potential for some strong wind gusts that could include maybe some wind gusts even outside of thunderstorms that are, in excess of 50 miles per hour. So we're not alone in there that high wind warnings have been issued for across the region because of that. From this morning, one of the things that has changed is that the severe risk area, if we kind of look at that, I think the overall risk area you can see expanding a little bit toward the south and east there. Locations, Meridian, southeastward there, so they've really kind of taken it that direction. But what there's also, we look at the tornado risk for tomorrow, you can see they have gone ahead and sliced a little bit on the northern end here, and this goes back to the same issue we've been talking about the last few days here, that amount of moisture. Is there enough moisture there to support the most significant storms? As we've talked about, that moisture is greatest to the south. That continues to remain to be the case, kind of based off of the most recent thinking here. And so one of the things that hopefully helps us out just a little bit as far as the wind potential is concerned, wind damage potential, that's where we would maintain, again, that level 2 and level 3 risk at the exact same level that we were talking about before, with the greatest strong tornado risk where that moisture is most available down to the south. That's still the spots there where we expect to have the greatest issues and impacts related to that. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and give me a second here to get on the right shot. So let's start off by kind of looking at a portion, looking in particular at the dew point. It's a measure of moisture based on the same scale as temperatures. We talked a lot about that last couple of days, how that's one of the things that will impact the overall severity of what we see as this populates in. As you can see, the dew points remain low. That's to be expected. Let's kind of wait for all the data to start getting in here. But you can see you have this wedge of moisture back out here into Texas. And yeah, that is an accurate real number there at -1 for that dew point in the Lubbock area. That shows you just how dry the dry area is kind of on the backside of this trying to scoop in. But you get a sense for that kind of peak of moisture that we have there shooting northward. I'll see if I can get a little more data. Most of our data points are kind of concentrated back here in this system. But definitely you can see that peak of moisture there that will kind of be the thing that it presents the challenge, how much that peak of moisture extends into our area. So the way in which we kind of resolve that is looking at this would be the HRRR, and again, storm ingredients, what we're looking at. And on this, again, we're looking at the amount of fuel. What I have on here is what's called convective inhibition that I'm placing over top of it. There's a time in the evening where, you've lost your heating of the day, that perhaps there's something inhibiting storm development. You can see where the models have things as of right now. And let's go back to what reality actually looks like on a satellite and radar composite there. That loads in. Let's get this on the latest frame there. You can see few storms already starting to kind of go back there, but they're not quite as intense on that positioning as what the model necessarily had at this point. Though additional storm development definitely likely back in Oklahoma, and I'm not going to pretend like that's something I've spent any time looking at tonight, because I haven't. But that gives you an idea that the instability of the fuel could be a little bit overdone here on this particular projection. Okay, so keep that in mind as this kind of advances eastward. You can see that kind of fills in for a big long line. You can also see lots of moisture heading northward. I'm stopping this here for a second by about 4 o'clock tomorrow morning on this particular projection. Obviously, back in the Texas where everything is more definitely formed and focused. as this complex moves toward our area, you'll notice we start getting into the activity perhaps as early as around 2 o'clock with some of these thunderstorms kind of running in advance. Now, there's always question, what are these? Are these, supercells? Are they rotating thunderstorms? Here's why I believe they're probably not. If we get rid of that precipitation for a moment, you could see that nose of fuel. It's pretty limited back there. In fact, if we go back to what you have on the plains tonight, and again, I'm going to turn off that convective inhibition for just a moment so you get just kind of a raw look at that. You can see how that point of fuel, obviously overnight, typically slides southward, but how definitely for our area is nowhere near what they've had on the plains. Okay, I'm going to put that convective inhibition back on here so we can kind of talk about our area. So here's where things get interesting. Looking at that fuel, we're at 5:30 tomorrow evening on the HRRR is the model represented here. But notice how you see that fuel just extend just slightly farther north over the course of the evening, and we keep that convective inhibition down. What we have is moisture that's pooling very near the front that's going to start charging northward into the evening. Let's go back here a moment so you get a better sense of this. So you can see the height there at 5 p.m. It's, if I just put a line on here, ignore the arrow for a second because there's an arrow. I just wanted to give you kind of an east-west line. And you'll notice how over the evening it just kind of shoots a little farther northward. That is that very narrow corridor we've been talking about where perhaps there is just enough fuel for this to do something tricky like produce a tornado. It's not an over-the-top amount of fuel, but the issue is we just have so much strong wind with this system that if these storms remain surface-based, we could have some real problems. And Storm Tracker here tries to show that that SIN, that's what I'm kind of depicting here, where you have kind of gray going over top of that. That's the inhibition. There are some issues with that. But largely, this tries to keep a lot of this potentially surface-based. I think certainly south, that's a much greater likelihood. But this amount of fuel here is nowhere near what they have on the plains for tonight. So again, there remain questions related to that. In saying that, though, you'll notice here on Storm Tracker, what this particular version of Storm Tracker does is it tries taking, and this is about as aggressive a projection as I can show you, hence the reason we're talking about it. Let's look at the most aggressive for a moment, right? So as this kind of rolls into the area, you'll notice that there's some spots here, perhaps some of those lead storms that are strong enough that show some signs of rotation. This is 7 p.m. tomorrow. Again, I'm going to pop this on and off for a second. That's in that zone where perhaps if you got a lead storm to develop, it would have more rotation and try to produce a tornado. So that's about as aggressive as I can show you. I'm going to see if I can force this, make sure I've forced this onto the latest run, and this is in fact the latest run here on Storm Tracker on this particular HRRR that we're looking at. So with that in mind, as you can kind of see there, some of those individual storms kind of running ahead, more of a tornado threat if this particular projection is to be believed. And I do have questions surrounding whether or not that one is exactly right. But I wanted to, of course, give you kind of the sort of worst case scenario on how that could play out. I'll show you a slightly different projection. We're still waiting on this one to come in. So this would be the one that we essentially showed at 5 and 6 o'clock. There will be a new version of this by 10 o'clock. So that's one of the updates that we will have as we're kind of assessing what this system is capable of. So give me a moment here to populate this. There we go. And so what this is depicting, again, most of the storms west of us as we go in that 2-3 o'clock time frame with primarily a line. And there are individual thunderstorms along that line that are showing rotation on there. Definitely, I would say, kind of looking at this. Let me get my second here that I usually use on the air. Just a moment. So I can see, just looking at this, certainly all these storms down closer to Jackson have some rotation with them, but you can just see some individual spots here along this line where storms show some rotation. Less farther north, more farther south, just because that fuel will be greatest farther south. Clear that off. And so again, that's looking 4, 5, 6. Oop, I jumped a little past it. Let me change my custom time frame here to make sure. Let's go +1 at 11 p.m. That'll allow me to be able to control this with a little more fine scale. Just give me a second. Okay, here we are. So we should be able to kind of animate this a little bit better for you. But yeah, so you'll notice that there are clearly some storms that have more rotation than them down south. This looks more like a line up north, and this looks more certainly choppy down south. Um, and so I would say in this case, right along the line itself, there are spinning areas that could try to produce tornadoes. So I still definitely see that in this projection. That's something that shows up in both projections. With the timing kind of peaking in our area as late as, say, 8 to 9 o'clock. And on the front end here, as I walk things back a moment, I'm not as concerned with the lead storms. But again, as you saw, there was that new projection, the HRRR, that does look a little more rough for the potential for lead storms. It's also one of the most aggressive when we look at the lower level moisture. Again, with moisture being the limiting factor, it's assuming, hey, the moisture's there, and yeah, we're going to get hit in a rough way. This one is a little more conservative when it comes to that moisture. And so all of that to say that the trend has been drier in a lot of these projections the last few days. But one of the things we're watching on these evening models coming in right now is that moisture influx. And that's something we'll do a much better job, I think, of hopefully nailing down with a final product coming up at 10 o'clock on WTVA 9 News. But the headlines here, I would say the timing has, to a certain extent, we're going with that faster, high resolution timing now, with really targeting the time frame, we'll say from 3 p.m. until 8 p.m. there. And certainly there's some wiggle room. I don't know that we get a whole lot earlier than 3 p.m., but it's not an impossibility down for the western portion of the area. Kind of our peak time frame, somewhere around 5 to 7 p.m. in our area. You can see 5:30 here, definitely showing some rotating storms there. And the question just all comes back to that just-in-time moisture. And a lot of times just-in-time isn't quite in time enough. So as we often do on these, just a reminder to be thinking about different ways in which you can find out if you're in danger. WTVA weather call, the weather app, NOAA weather radio, code red, FEMA, all ways in which, of course, you can do that. And of course, encourage you to kind of check out as many of those as possible. And then just, the basic stuff, remember where you will shelter if push really comes to shove with this here. We often talk about those safe places. I put this graphic up every single severe weather event that we have, those tornado safety rules, just kind of be analyzing where that sturdy structure, the lowest floor, that whole thing, where you're going to be in that time frame from really 3 is early. This have to run really fast, and I'd have a hard time believing there's enough moisture to really support it at 3 back west. But let's just say not an impossibility until close to 8 to 9 o'clock tomorrow evening at the latest on the Alabama side there. Really is the time frame, again, we're working on there. And so some of the ways to be thinking about that is just to make sure that, you keep your phone charged, hard-soled shoes, in case for one reason or another we have more issues there. Gather important documents and meds, and of course steps away from that safe place. And then just, again, when it mentions evacuate manufactured homes, that's once the watches are issued, making sure that we are at the safest location possible. That is ultimately the goal we're going for here. All right, so as I kind of retreat back here to the first graphic that we kind of showed, which is that severe risk area for tomorrow, a couple things on that. New one of those comes out at midnight tonight. What do we anticipate? I need to look at a few more of these super high-res models, which are all kind of coming in right now, to get a better sense on some of those. I mean, if the moisture looks like it's there, it would be easy for them to take this level 3 risk back farther north. This just all comes down to moisture. The strong winds aloft are very strong. In certain parts of the country, they're, historically strong for this time of the year. It's going to lead to strong winds before and after this line comes through. So we're going to knock down some trees before the line ever gets here. That is what I wanted to touch on. And I was going to get something. Hold on. So what I want to show is the model wind. Give me a moment to kind of pop up. Let's do this one. Might be our best bet. A moment for that to all the way load in. And sure, it's not going to let me go as fine scale. But you'll note here, this is 6:30, this is 9, this is 10 o'clock in the morning, right? 1 p.m. The storms are still west, but this is widespread where you see the yellows and yellowish oranges there, 40 mile per hour wind gusts, maybe 45 mile per hour wind gusts. This is before any storms have ever got here. And so even outside of the storms, as you can see, very strong winds. In the storms, we show pinks, 60, 60, 70 mile per hour winds possible, the strongest of those. You can see it does have some of those strongest in our area. So as much as I talked about that tornado threat, the severe wind threat is a much greater likelihood on this from many spots. Now, while it does show the wind speeds calming down a little bit directly after the front comes in, you could see tomorrow night the winds remain fairly breezy. I mean, not over the top, but 30, maybe 40 mile per hour winds. And you could still see some strong winds kind of coming back in here into Wednesday with this. So our fire danger will remain elevated. And the potential for sporadic wind damage. I mean, this is midday Wednesday. I still have greens and yellows, the law spots. That's 30, 40 mile per hour winds, even through midday and into the afternoon on Wednesday. You can see it'll be probably late Wednesday evening before things start calming down as the system moves away. And that's why the first graphic I started with is probably the last graphic I'll end up with here tonight. And that is the fact that we do have wind advisories that have been issued for all locations in the WTVA 9 News viewing area and really across the region. Technically, they call it a wind advisory, high wind advisory. The thing is that the high wind warning is the greater of those alerts. That's been issued back to the west. If we start getting the situation where we're getting, 55 or greater mile per hour winds, I mean, severe winds just out of clear air, it's not impossible to see an upgrade to a high wind warning. Projections don't go quite that high, but again, that's not an impossibility. That is to say, it will be windy before storms get here. Strong winds, maybe 60, 70 miles per hour in some spots. Windstorms come through and then becoming windy once again as we go into your Wednesday. So fire danger will remain fairly high all those days despite any rainfall we end up seeing. So keep that in mind. And obviously, sporadic wind damage possibility with this as well as the strong system kind of moves through the region. Okay, so with that in mind, we'll go ahead and shut this down here. Appreciate everyone for kind of logging in, all of your comments. Unfortunately, my thing here is not letting me really see comments at the moment, so I'll have to go back and kind of check some of those out after the fact here. So keep here for the latest. We'll have updates at 10 o'clock on looking at that storm rotation. That's what I have to get off here and kind of check in some of our other projections. And we'll find which of these models, honestly, we're going to end up showing. The fact that I am seeing some of those discrete storms ahead is always a little bit concerning. We'll do another update tomorrow morning, likely probably around 9 o'clock in the morning or so. I say that. I think I have a haircut tomorrow morning, so I might have to kick that back just a little bit. Yeah, it'll probably be maybe 9:30 or so before we get that going tomorrow morning, depending on how we can kind of align everything. All right. Again, appreciate all those prayers for mom recently. She's doing better. Just a kind of a slow thing, but yeah, she's doing better. So that's a good sign. Not all the way better, but make an improvement there. And I'm just gonna go ahead and pray real quick. God protect these people, help them make wise choices. And I thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with them today. God, just protect us from the bad weather tomorrow. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. I will see you guys at 10 o'clock over on NBC and ABC, I believe. We're all lined up on time tonight. So we will see you there.